You built the problem wrong. The voice came from behind the fence, low and steady, cutting clean through the chatter of 12 Delta operators clustered around the simulation table. No one turned at first. They were too busy arguing over angles, over timing, over why the breach kept failing at exactly 600 yards no matter how they tweaked the variables. The afternoon sun hung heavy over the range, heat shimmering above the gravel, the faint hum of generators blending with the distant thump of rotor blades somewhere beyond the ridge. Staff Sergeant Kyle Mercer exhaled sharply and slammed his gloved hand against the tablet. Run it again. The screen flickered. Same result. Same failure point. 2 men down, every time. A few of the younger operators shifted, frustration bleeding into their posture. That was when Mercer finally turned. The old man stood alone beyond the perimeter fence, hands resting loosely at his sides, posture relaxed like he had nowhere else to be. Worn denim jacket, faded boots. No insignia, no rank, nothing that belonged anywhere near a restricted training zone. Mercer squinted, irritation rising fast. "Hey," he called out, voice sharp, carrying across the open ground. "This area's off limits." The old man didn't move. His eyes weren't on Mercer. They were on the terrain, the ridgeline, the wind flags snapping in uneven rhythm. He watched the field like it was speaking to him. Mercer stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel, the sound loud in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the team. "You lost, old man." A few operators chuckled under their breath. One of them muttered something about base security slipping again. The old man finally shifted his gaze, slow and deliberate, meeting Mercer's eyes with a calm that didn't match the situation. No apology, no hesitation, just observation. "You built the problem wrong," he repeated. The words landed heavier this time. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. Mercer let out a short laugh, more edge than humor. "That's so." He gestured toward the tablet. "We've got satellite data, real-time wind modeling, full terrain mapping. You think you see something all that missed?" The old man glanced back at the field, the flags, the way the dust lifted in thin, uneven streams across the ground. "Your entry angle assumes one wind," he said. "There are 3. Silence pressed in around them. One of the younger operators shifted his weight, eyes flicking toward the flags like he was seeing them for the first time. Mercer's jaw tightened. "We accounted for crosswind. Not the thermal rise off that rock face at 400 yards, the old man said quietly. And not the downdraft from the ravine. Your breach collapses before it starts." The generator hum seemed louder now. Sharper. Mercer stared at him for a long second, then scoffed, turning back to the tablet. "Run it," he snapped. Fingers moved. Data recalculated. The screen updated. And for the first time all afternoon, the failure point shifted. Not gone, but moved. Exactly where the old man had said it would. No one laughed this time. Somewhere behind Mercer, Specialist Ryan Cole felt something cold settle in his chest as he looked from the screen back to the man outside the fence. The air shifted in a way no one could explain, like the range itself had gone quiet to listen, and Mercer felt it before he understood it. A subtle tightening in his chest as every instinct he trusted started pulling in 2 different directions at once, one telling him to dismiss the man outside the fence as just another trespasser, the other telling him something was deeply, dangerously off. He turned slowly, studying the old man again, this time not as an interruption but as a variable he had failed to account for. And the realization irritated him more than the failed simulation ever had, because Delta operators were not supposed to miss things like that. "Run it again," Mercer said, but his voice had lost a fraction of its edge, just enough for the team to notice, and the tablet lit up once more, numbers recalculating, wind vectors shifting, the model adapting to the correction, and again the breach failed, but not where it had before, now collapsing at a different point, deeper into the sequence, exactly where the old man had predicted, and this time no one spoke at all. Specialist Ryan Cole swallowed, his eyes flicking between the data and the man beyond the fence, replaying every word in his head, the precision of it, the calm certainty, the way he had not hesitated or guessed, and a memory stirred somewhere in the back of his mind, something from a briefing, a name half forgotten, a reference that had never been fully explained. Mercer stepped closer to the fence, boots grinding into the gravel, stopping just a few feet from the old man, close enough now to see the details he had ignored before. The faint scar along the man's jaw, the weathered lines around his eyes, the kind that did not come from age alone, but from years spent reading environments most people never even noticed. "You got a name?" Mercer asked, arms crossing, posture tightening as if reclaiming control of the situation could restore the balance he had just lost. The old man did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting once more across the range, following the flags as they snapped in uneven patterns, the wind carrying dust and thin, shifting lines that seemed random to everyone else. "Names do not change what you are seeing," he said finally, voice low, almost thoughtful, as if the question itself had been irrelevant. A few operators shifted uncomfortably, the tension building in a way that felt unfamiliar, because this was not how control slipped. Not here, not with them. Mercer exhaled through his nose, a short, controlled breath, then reached back and grabbed the tablet, stepping forward again and holding it up just enough for the old man to see the screen, the simulated terrain, the approach vector, the failure point blinking in red. "Then explain this," Mercer said, tone sharper now, pushing, testing, refusing to yield ground. "You say we built it wrong, so fix it." And for the first time, the old man's eyes dropped to the tablet, not with curiosity, but with recognition, like he had seen this exact problem before, long before it had ever been turned into code. He did not touch the screen, did not lean closer, did not even adjust his stance. He just looked at it for a moment, then lifted his gaze back to the field beyond them, the real terrain stretching out under the fading afternoon light. "You are solving the wrong problem," he said, and something in his voice changed, not louder, not stronger, just deeper, like a truth settling into place. Behind Mercer, Cole felt that same cold weight return, heavier now, as a detail finally snapped into focus, something about the pattern, the phrasing, the way the man spoke about the problem as if he had designed it. And without thinking, Cole took a step back, his hand already reaching for his phone, heart starting to beat a little faster as he realized this was no longer just a training anomaly. This was something else entirely, something that did not belong in their reports or their simulations, something that should not have been standing quietly outside a fence waiting for them to notice it. Ryan Cole moved fast but carefully, stepping away from the group as if he were just repositioning, his thumb already unlocking his phone, pulse steady but heavier than it should have been for a routine training day, because nothing about this felt routine anymore. Behind him, Mercer held his ground at the fence, jaw tight, eyes locked on the old man, refusing to let the silence stretch any further than it already had. "Then tell me what the right problem is," he said, voice controlled but carrying that unmistakable edge of challenge, the kind that had been sharpened over years of never being wrong. The old man did not answer immediately, his attention drifting once more across the terrain, the ridgeline, the shallow dip in the earth where heat shimmered differently, the flags snapping out of sync with each other, each one telling a slightly different story. "You are trying to force a clean entry into a field that was never meant to be clean," he said at last, his voice calm, almost distant, like he was describing something obvious that no one else had noticed. Mercer frowned, irritation flaring again. "That is the objective," he replied, gesturing toward the tablet still glowing in his hand. "Controlled entry, minimal exposure, full extraction window." The words coming out like doctrine, precise, practiced, certain. The old man gave a faint shake of his head, not dismissive, just final. "That objective assumes the field behaves," he said. "This one does not." And the way he said it made something shift in the air again, subtle but undeniable. One of the operators behind Mercer muttered under his breath, running a quick adjustment through the model, fingers moving faster now, less confident, more reactive, and the screen updated again, showing a new path, a slight deviation, the breach line bending just enough to account for the layered winds the old man had described. And this time the simulation ran longer, deeper into the sequence, but still failed, just later, just differently, like it was chasing a solution it could not quite reach. Mercer watched it finish, the red marker blinking again, and for the first time there was no immediate command, no correction, just a pause that stretched longer than it should have. Outside the fence, the old man's gaze settled on a narrow strip of ground near the edge of the simulated entry point, a place no one had paid attention to because it looked unremarkable, flat, open, easy. You keep going through the center, he said quietly. That is why it keeps breaking. Mercer's eyes narrowed. It is the most direct route, he replied. And there it was again, that certainty, that reliance on efficiency over instinct. The old man looked at him, really looked this time, and there was something in his expression that was not judgment, not even correction, but recognition. Like he had seen this exact moment play out before, in a different place, under different conditions. Direct is predictable, he said. Predictable is fragile. The words landing with a weight that was hard to explain but impossible to ignore. Across the range, a gust of wind rolled through, lifting dust in a thin spiral that cut across the field at an angle no one had charted, and Mercer's eyes followed it without meaning to, watching how it bent, how it split, how it disappeared just as quickly as it had formed. Behind him, Cole turned his back fully now, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent as the line connected. I need a confirmation, he said, glancing once over his shoulder at the man outside the fence. Arthur Hale. Is he on any active registry? There was a pause on the other end, a longer one than expected, and when the response finally came, it was not immediate, not simple, and Cole felt his grip tighten on the phone as he realized the answer was not going to fit into anything they had been told about this place, or this mission, or the man quietly standing just beyond their understanding. The voice on the other end of Cole's phone did not answer right away, and that silence carried more weight than any immediate response ever could, the kind of pause that meant someone was not looking something up, but deciding whether it should be said at all. Say that name again. The voice finally replied, lower now, sharper, stripped of casual tone. Cole swallowed, eyes fixed on the old man beyond the fence. Arthur Hale, he repeated, steady but tight. He is standing outside Delta, training perimeter Bravo, and he just corrected a live simulation without touching the system. Another pause, shorter this time, followed by the faint sound of movement, a chair shifting, a door closing somewhere far away. Do not engage further, the voice said, each word measured, deliberate. Who is with him? Cole glanced back, watching Mercer still squared off at the fence. The rest of the team frozen between skepticism and something they did not want to name. No one, Cole answered. Quietly, he is alone. The response came instantly now. No hesitation left. He is never alone. And the line went dead. Cole lowered the phone slowly, a cold realization settling into his chest as he turned back toward the range. Every instinct telling him this had just moved far beyond training protocol. At the fence, Mercer shifted his stance, frustration tightening his shoulders as the old man's calm refused to break. You keep talking like you have seen this before, Mercer said, voice sharper now, pushing for control. You have not. The old man's eyes moved back to him, steady, unreadable. I have, he said simply, and there was no emphasis, no attempt to convince, just a statement placed into the air like it had always been there. Mercer let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it did not carry the same confidence as before. This is a classified Delta simulation, he said, tapping the tablet with a gloved finger. No one outside this unit has access to it. The old man's gaze drifted briefly to the screen, then back to the field. You gave it a new name, he said. That does not make it new. The words landed harder than anything he had said before, because they did not challenge the simulation. They dismissed its originality entirely. Behind Mercer, one of the operators muttered, pulling up archived scenarios, searching for pattern overlaps, fingers moving faster now, urgency creeping into every motion, and the results began to populate, fragments of older models, partial matches, references that should not have existed in their current system. Mercer saw it in the reflection of the screen, the shift in his team, the cracks forming in the certainty that had held them together minutes ago, and it pushed him forward again, closer to the fence, closer to the man who stood there like he had nowhere else to be. Then, show me, Mercer said, voice lower now, more controlled, but carrying something new beneath it, something that sounded less like a challenge and more like a demand for truth. If you have seen it, show me where it breaks. The old man studied him for a long second, the wind lifting slightly between them, carrying dust in thin lines across the ground, the flags snapping out of sync again, each one telling a different story that no one had fully listened to until now. It does not break where you think. he said quietly, and for the first time, he stepped closer to the fence, just enough to narrow the distance, just enough for Mercer to see the clarity in his eyes. It breaks where you assume control. And something about that sentence settled deep, heavier than the others, like it reached beyond the simulation and into something much older. Across the range, a vehicle engine came to life in the distance, low and steady, growing louder as it approached, but no one turned to look, not yet, because every eye was still locked on the man who had just shifted the ground beneath them without ever raising his voice. The low rumble of the approaching vehicle grew louder, steady, and deliberate, cutting through the stillness that had settled over the range. And this time a few heads turned, operators glancing toward the access road as a black government SUV rolled into view, its tires crunching over gravel with controlled precision. Mercer did not move at first, his focus still locked on the man at the fence, but something in the timing of it, the way the vehicle arrived without hesitation, without being called in through any visible channel, forced a shift in his attention. The SUV came to a stop just short of the perimeter, engine idling for a brief second before cutting off, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound that had preceded it. The door opened, and Colonel James Whitaker stepped out, his uniform crisp, his posture exact, the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself because it carried its own gravity. Every operator on the range straightened instinctively, years of training snapping into place, but Whitaker did not acknowledge them. Not yet, his eyes already searching, already fixed on a point beyond them. Mercer turned fully now, stepping back from the fence as the colonel approached, confusion tightening his expression. "Sir," he began, but the word barely left his mouth before Whitaker passed him without a glance. The colonel's pace did not change, measured and direct, each step closing the distance to the fence where the old man stood waiting. As if he had known exactly when this moment would arrive, the air seemed to shift again, quieter now, as Whitaker stopped a few feet from the barrier, his gaze locking onto Arthur Hale with a focus that carried something deeper than recognition, something closer to certainty. For a brief second, neither man spoke, and in that silence, every operator on the range felt it, the weight of something they did not understand but could not ignore. Mercer looked between them, the unease in his chest sharpening. "Sir, this individual is interfering with." Whitaker raised a hand. Not abrupt, not forceful, but final, cutting the sentence cleanly in half without ever looking away from Hale. "Stand down," he said, voice low, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation. Mercer froze, the command settling into him before his thoughts could catch up, and behind him, the rest of the team followed suit, the shift from control to compliance happening in a single breath. Whitaker took one more step closer to the fence, his posture straightening just slightly, the smallest adjustment that carried the weight of formal respect, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, not louder, not softer, but different in a way that made every word land heavier. "You should not be here," he said, but there was no accusation in it, only a statement of fact layered with something unspoken. Hale's expression did not change, his eyes steady, almost reflective, as if he had heard variations of that sentence his entire life. "Neither should this," Hale replied, his gaze shifting briefly toward the simulation tablet still clutched in Mercer's hand, then back to Whitaker. "Yet here we are," and the simplicity of it carried more weight than any explanation could have. Whitaker exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that seemed to settle something internally, and for the first time since arriving, he broke eye contact, glancing toward the tablet, toward the team, toward the field they had been trying to control. When his gaze returned to Hale, there was no hesitation left, no uncertainty, only confirmation. "They do not know what they are looking at," Whitaker said, not as a question, not even as a judgment, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the gap that had just been exposed. Behind him, Mercer felt that sentence land harder than anything that had come before, because it was not directed at the old man, it was directed at them, at everything they thought they understood. Whitaker turned slightly now, just enough to address the team, without fully taking his focus off Hale. "You are not correcting a simulation," he said, voice steady, carrying across the range with absolute clarity. "You are standing in front of the man it was built from." And in that moment, the ground beneath Mercer's certainty gave way completely, not with noise, not with shock, but with a silence so complete it felt like the entire range had stopped breathing. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and final. And for a moment no one moved, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to fill the space that had just been opened. Mercer felt it first in his hands, the subtle tightening of his grip around the tablet, the screen still glowing with a simulation that now felt incomplete, like it had been stripped of something essential he had never known was missing. He looked at Hale again, really looked this time, not as a disruption, not as a variable, but as the source, and the shift in perspective was not gradual, it was immediate, like a line had been crossed without warning. Behind him, one of the operators let out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding, while another lowered his gaze to the ground, replaying every word, every assumption, every moment of quiet dismissal that had led them here. Colonel Whitaker remained still, his presence anchoring the moment, his attention fixed on Hale with a level of respect that did not need to be explained. And that alone said more than any briefing ever could. "You built this," Mercer said finally, the words coming out slower than he intended, each one carrying the weight of something he was still trying to understand. Hale did not answer right away, his eyes drifting back across the range, following the wind as it moved in layered patterns that now seemed impossible to ignore. "I lived it," he said at last, and the distinction settled deep, reshaping the meaning of everything they had been trying to solve. Mercer's jaw tightened, not in defiance this time, but in recognition of a gap he could not close with training or rank or experience alone. "Then why does it still fail?" he asked, quieter now, the edge gone, replaced by something closer to focus. Hale shifted slightly, just enough to change his angle to the field, the sunlight catching the lines in his face, highlighting the years that had carved precision into instinct. "Because you were trying to control something that was never controlled," he said, his voice steady, grounded in a certainty that did not need reinforcement. Mercer glanced back at the tablet, the blinking failure point now feeling less like an error and more like a message he had not known how to read. Behind him, Cole stepped forward again, slower this time, the phone still in his hand but forgotten for the moment, his attention locked on Hale with a clarity that bordered on disbelief. "Sir," Cole said quietly, directing the word toward Whitaker, but unable to take his eyes off the man at the fence. "The records, there is nothing complete." Whitaker did not look at him, his gaze still fixed on Hale. "There would not be," he replied, tone calm, almost expected. "Some things are not written down." And that sentence settled into the space like a final confirmation of everything they had just been forced to reconsider. Mercer exhaled slowly, the weight of it all pressing in from every direction. And for the first time since the exercise began, he did not reach for the tablet, did not call for another run, did not try to correct the model. Instead, he looked back at Hale, the distance between them unchanged, but everything else completely different. "So what are we missing?" Mercer asked, and this time it was not a challenge, not a test, but a question asked with the understanding that the answer would not come from the system in his hands. Hale met his gaze again, and for a brief moment, something almost unnoticeable passed through his expression, not approval, not judgment, but recognition of the shift that had finally occurred. The wind moved across the range again, softer now, carrying dust and thin, shifting lines, and Hale followed it with his eyes before speaking. "You are not missing anything," he said quietly. "You are ignoring it." And the words did not land as criticism, but as something far more precise, like a correction that had been waiting long before they arrived. The wind shifted again, softer now, but more defined, and this time every operator on the range noticed it, not because it had changed, but because they had. Mercer stood still, eyes tracking the movement across the ground, watching how the dust curled low before rising in a narrow line that cut diagonally across the field, a pattern he had seen all afternoon but never truly observed. Hale did not move, his posture unchanged. But there was a quiet expectation in his stillness, as if he had already said everything that needed to be said and was simply waiting for them to catch up. Mercer exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the open air, and lowered the tablet at his side, not out of defeat, but out of recognition that it was no longer leading the situation. "Then we adjust the entry," Mercer said, more to himself than anyone else. his voice steady but stripped of its earlier certainty. Offset the approach, avoid the center, one of. The operators behind him nodded quickly, already moving to implement the change, fingers tapping across the screen with renewed focus. But this time there was no rush, no assumption that speed would solve what understanding had not. The simulation updated again, the entry line bending away from the center, following a less direct path that mirrored the subtle shifts in the terrain, and for the first time, the model held, the breach extending further than it had before, deeper into the sequence. Without collapsing immediately, a quiet tension built as the operators watched the progression, each second stretching longer than the last, until the sequence reached a point none of them had seen yet. And then, just as it seemed to stabilize, the system faltered again, not at 600 yards, not at the adjusted point, but further in, where the variables compounded in ways the model could not reconcile. Mercer watched it finish, the failure marker blinking once more, but something was different this time, not in the result, but in his reaction to it. He did not curse, did not call for another run, did not reach for a correction. Instead, he looked back at Hale, the question already forming before he spoke. "It gets further," Mercer said, his tone measured, analytical, "but it still breaks." Hale nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible motion, as if confirming something already known. "Because you are still solving it as a path," he said quietly. "It is not a path." Mercer frowned slightly, the words not immediately translating into something actionable. "Then what is it?" he asked. And this time the question carried no resistance, only intent. Hale's gaze moved across the range once more, slower now, deliberate, tracing the invisible lines that connected wind, terrain, and timing into something the system could not fully capture. "It is a moment," he said, and the simplicity of it made it harder, not easier, to grasp. Behind Mercer, Cole stepped closer, his earlier unease now sharpened into focus. "A moment," he repeated under his breath, eyes flicking between the field and the screen as if trying to see the connection. Hale continued, his voice steady. "You do not force it, you wait for it." And something in that sentence shifted the entire frame of the problem, pulling it out of structure and into instinct. Mercer's grip tightened slightly around the tablet, not in frustration, but in concentration, his mind recalibrating, moving away from control and toward observation. Across the range, the wind flags snapped again, uneven, out of sync. But now each movement felt like a signal rather than noise. Colonel Whitaker remained silent, watching the exchange without interruption, his presence steady, allowing the realization to unfold without direction. Mercer looked back at the field, then at Hale, then at the tablet, and for the first time since the exercise began, he did not see a system to fix, but a condition to understand. "When?" Mercer asked, the word quiet but precise, and Hale met his gaze, the faintest hint of something unreadable passing through his expression before he answered. "When it stops fighting you," he said, and the range fell silent again, not with confusion this time, but with the weight of a truth that could not be rushed. The range did not change, but the way they stood inside it did, and that difference settled quietly into every movement, every breath, every glance toward the wind flags that now felt less like indicators and more like signals waiting to be understood. Mercer did not look at the tablet this time. He let it hang at his side, his attention fixed entirely on the field, on the shifting currents of air that moved in layers too subtle for the system to fully capture, and for the first time since the exercise began, he did nothing, and that nothing was deliberate. Behind him, the operators mirrored the stillness, their usual rhythm of constant adjustment replaced by observation, their training holding them in place but their instincts beginning to recalibrate. Cole watched the flags, then the dust, then the slight movement of heat rising off the rock face at roughly 400 yards, and he felt it, not as data, but as a pattern forming just beyond conscious thought. Hale remained at the fence, silent now, his presence no longer an interruption but a reference point, something fixed against the shifting environment, his eyes moving slowly across the terrain as if tracking a rhythm only he could fully read. Colonel Whitaker stood a few steps behind the line, arms at his sides, saying nothing, allowing the moment to unfold without command. because he knew this was not something that could be ordered into place. Seconds passed, then stretched, the quiet deepening until even the distant hum of machinery seemed to fade into the background. Mercer narrowed his eyes slightly, following a faint change in the wind pattern, a brief alignment between two flags that had been out of sync all afternoon, the dust lifting in a cleaner line, the thermal rise flattening just enough to alter the flow. It was subtle, almost nothing, and it would have been easy to miss, but now he was looking for it. Now, Mercer said, the word low but immediate, and one of the operators reacted without hesitation, fingers moving across the tablet, initiating the run with the adjusted entry held in readiness. The simulation responded instantly, the path aligning not with a fixed route, but with a timed insertion, the variables shifting in real time to match the condition rather than force it. And this time the sequence held, extending further, stabilizing through the point where it had failed before. No one spoke, no one moved. They simply watched as the progression continued, each second carrying more weight than the last, until the breach completed cleanly, not because the system had been perfected, but because it had been allowed to follow something outside its original design. The screen settled, no red marker, no failure point, just a completed sequence that had not existed. Moments ago, Mercer stared at it, the silence around him deep and absolute, then slowly lifted his gaze back to Hale. The old man had not moved, had not reacted, as if the outcome had never been in question. Mercer took a single step closer to the fence, not out of challenge this time, but out of something quieter, something closer to acknowledgement. That was it, Mercer said, his voice steady but changed, the certainty now rooted in understanding rather than assumption. Hale gave a faint nod, almost imperceptible, his eyes already drifting back to the field as if the moment had passed. Behind Mercer, Cole let out a breath he had been holding, the tension in his shoulders easing as the realization settled fully into place. Colonel Whitaker stepped forward then, just one pace, his gaze moving from the tablet to Hale, and there was a finality in his expression now, a confirmation that went beyond the result on the screen. You were never meant to solve it alone, Whitaker said quietly, not as a correction, but as a truth that had been waiting to be understood, and in that moment, every operator on the range knew they had not just completed a simulation, they had stepped into something that had been built long before they ever arrived, something that could not be learned from code, only recognized when it finally revealed itself. The screen remained steady, the completed sequence glowing quietly in Mercer's hand, but no one reached for it, no one celebrated, because the victory did not feel like something they had earned, it felt like something they had been allowed to witness. The wind moved again across the range, softer now, less chaotic, as if the environment itself had settled after being understood rather than forced. And Mercer stood there for a long moment, eyes shifting from the field to the man beyond the fence, trying to reconcile the difference between what he had believed and what he had just seen. Why was it built this way? Mercer asked finally, his voice low, not demanding, not challenging, but searching, and the question carried more weight than anything he had said before because it came without certainty. Hale did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the light had begun to soften, stretching long shadows across the terrain, the same terrain that had refused to cooperate until it had been read correctly. Because that is how it happens, Hale said at last, his voice quiet but absolute. Not in lines, not in plans, but in moments that do not wait for you to be ready. The words settled into the air, not as instruction, but as something older, something that could not be simplified into doctrine. Mercer nodded. Once, slowly, the movement small but deliberate, as if acknowledging a lesson that could not be written down. Behind him, the operators remained still, each one processing the same shift in their own way. The realization that everything they had trusted to guide them was only part of something larger, something that could not be fully captured by systems or simulations. Colonel Whitaker stepped forward again, closing the last bit of distance to the fence, his posture straight, his expression composed. But there was something unmistakable in the way he carried himself now, something that spoke not of rank, but of respect. He did not address Mercer, did not address the team. His attention remained on Hale, and when he spoke, his voice was measured, steady, carrying across the quiet range with a clarity that left no room for doubt. They will learn from this, Whitaker said, not as a promise, but as a statement of intent. And Hale gave a faint nod, the same subtle acknowledgement he had given before, as if the outcome had always been known. For a brief moment, no one moved, the silence stretching just long enough to hold the weight of what had been revealed. And then Hale stepped back from the fence, the motion simple, unhurried, as if there was nothing left for him to say. Mercer watched him go, the distance widening again, but this time it did not feel like separation. It felt like perspective, like the understanding that some things were not meant to stay, only to appear when they were needed. The old man did not look back, did not wait for recognition or thanks. He simply walked along the perimeter, his figure gradually blending into the fading light until he was just another shape against the horizon. And then even that was gone. Mercer stood there long after, the tablet still in his hand, the completed sequence still visible. But now it felt different, no longer a solution, but a reminder, a reference to something deeper than the system itself. Behind him, Cole lowered his phone completely, the unanswered questions no longer urgent, replaced by a quiet certainty that they had already been given what they needed.